Gildan Media, a division of Recorded Books, presents Powered by Change: How to Design Your Business for Perpetual Success by Jonathan Macdonald. Narrated by Jonathan Macdonald.
When the winds of change blow, some people build walls and others build windmills. Chinese proverb. Part 1. The Windmill Theory. Chapter 1. The Reality of Perpetual Change. There's an ancient proverb that states, when the winds of change are blowing, some build a wall, others build a windmill. It's a saying that's thousands of years old, but it could not be more relevant to what's happening all around us today. Life and business, people and politics, economics and technology, all facets of our 21st century capitalist existence are constantly changing. How we respond will determine our survival or failure as individuals, as companies, and as a society at large. In a transient business environment where consultants McKinsey & Company estimate that only 1/3 of transformation strategies actually succeed, it has never been harder to see accurately what's happening around us, interpret that information efficiently, and develop effective strategies that are executed in a successful way. This book is designed to help do just that, because the alternative is bleak. Quite simply, more than half the top businesses of today are unlikely to survive. Why is this so? After all, commentators have been warning for some time about new paradigms, the need for business agility, and how only those truly agile and adaptive companies will survive. Despite that, we've already seen in this young century the decline, and in some cases demise, of names from Yahoo to Nokia to BlackBerry to Kodak. Each spent billions of dollars on brand building, senior executive teams with great track records, and costly external advisors, yet still fell foul of those inevitable winds of change. Much has been written about what unites these failures and what lessons their falls from grace contain. Yet such analysis simply reinforces the fallacy that the inability to adapt to change is something that only a mere handful of businesses are guilty of. In fact, the very opposite is true. Despite the colossal size and reputations of the world's largest corporations, only a few are going to survive the changes that are to batter their business models and strategies over the next 50 years. There are 3 reasons for this. 1. A greater degree of change is on the way than has occurred in the past. 2. The rate of ongoing change is going to be a lot faster than we have previously experienced. 3. History shows that companies are poor at coping with and responding effectively to change. Consider this. 88% of the companies that were in the Fortune 500 list of the world's largest corporations in 1965 are not in that list today. Over an even shorter sample period of time, corporate resilience is not much better, with 74% of the Fortune 100 list having disappeared since 1980. The reason we are so bad at adapting to change is that we constantly misunderstand the nature and speed of such change. Change is seen as a threat, so our mindset focuses on strategies to react and adapt to it rapidly, with the aim of protecting what we have at all costs. In reality, the rate of change is quickening, so rapidly that I confidently predict that in the future, the 88% statistic I quoted will apply to a time frame of just 5 years, rather than the 50-year period of the past. I truly believe that this is a monumental problem facing all companies, but our businesses are either choosing to ignore it altogether or are tackling it with fundamentally the wrong approach. Businesses should be learning to anticipate change. They could be setting the agendas rather than merely following them, and above all, they must be committed to genuinely innovating rather than copying. As our record in clairvoyance and fortune-telling leaves much to be desired, this requires a complete reappraisal of how humankind is wired to view and respond to change, as well as an acknowledgement that throughout history, the mere presence of change has actually been the only constant. Change is the only constant. It's hard to argue against that statement looking through the rearview mirror, isn't it? So why do we as humans, entrepreneurs and leaders have such a problem with organising ourselves not in a 3-year programme of change, a 5-year plan, or even a 10-year vision, but in readiness for always happening, never stopping, perpetual change? The answer has much to do with the fact that change doesn't happen at a uniform rate, but in an exponential fashion. As every day goes past, since the Big Bang or any other dawn of time of your choice, the pace of change each day has gotten faster. Consider the way that nature is structured in evolutionary terms, with one cell dividing into 2, that duo becoming 4, that quartet turning into 8, and 8 cells doubling to 16. A 16-fold growth is just 4 steps after there was only 1 cell. Nothing naturally happens in a perfectly linear way. And in fact, the way that change accelerates, and is organic, is something that we have been programmed as humans to want to resist. This resistance is our natural comfort zone, because we like feeling in control of our situation, even if the evidence would suggest that the reality is that we never truly are. It's a worrying trait of humankind, in our careers and in business, because comfort is something that, despite feeling good at the time, means we are decoupled from the true rate of change. As it is so popular to resist the winds of change, the question then becomes whether that is perhaps a valid decision to take. I personally don't believe that it is, if the desire to create and build future success exists. The way to really view the future, when we look at the context of modern business, society, and technology, is an acknowledgement and acceptance of the fact that today is actually the slowest pace of change we will ever experience. The change in the next 10 years, in terms of technical development, computerization, and all other associated capabilities, is likely to be the same as the entire set of such changes over the last 50 years. Change is exponential, and change accelerates. The mere thought of that may make our minds and bodies groan, limited as they are by a linear time frame. It may seem like a huge exaggeration to envisage transformation 5 times greater or faster than the progress of the last half-century, the invention of fiber optics, email, IVF, barcodes, the internet, the World Wide Web, mobile phones, and a deluge of digitally connected devices. Yet our current reality is that we're already at a time where the average smartphone has the same computing power as the whole of NASA did in 1969. Our minds simply cannot conceive of what 2026 will be like if the rate of such change increases exponentially. All the evidence suggests, though, that this is exactly what will happen, and therefore there is no historical, present, or future validity in deciding to resist change. With resistance futile, survival, and indeed the potential for us and our businesses to truly thrive, will rely on us moving from a mindset of one-off change management to one of how we manage the perpetual change that is accelerating across trends, industries, macroeconomic forces, societies, behaviours, and markets. This change comes in many forms, from globalization to the explosive growth in artificial intelligence and robotics technology. It incorporates geopolitical upheaval, such as the emergence of China as one of the world's leading economies, and also includes environmental and societal challenges, including climate change and sustainability. Then there are aging demographics, talent and skills shortages, changing terrorism threats, and the exponentially growing danger that every business potentially faces from cybercrime. These are changes that affect businesses small to large, but there will be others pertaining to different segments, from tax changes for startups to different inheritance provisions for family firms. This is the business world we operate within. It's not just about new technology. It's about every single factor in the external landscape that impacts on every part of an organization internally. Everything that we know and have known is changing faster, and it is the ability to respond to these changes that determines our future and our success. Walls or windmills? Perpetual change is our reality, but it would seem that the business reaction is usually one of inaction. Businesses are inured to being told they are living and operating in an era of constant change. They want a break from corporate transition programs. They think they have much more time than they do. They are tired of change and ideally seem to want an easy period in which to make hay while the sun shines now. I hold a very strong belief that the ability of an organization, group of people, or individual to survive and thrive in a world of perpetual change depends on whether they are building a windmill to use the winds of change as a powering mechanism, or erecting a wall in an attempt to resist the forces they face. This is more often than not a legacy issue. It is critical that CEOs and leaders initiate transformations in culture that make their organizations more change responsive, even if they will no longer be around to see the continued fruit of their work. Too often, I have come across business leaders and company executives who are simply riding out the last few years of their pre-retirement tenure or before they move on, hoping against hope that they will be out of the door before the onslaught of change demolishes everything that they have presided over. Sadly, they often don't seem to care that by doing this, they are betting against the entire potential future of their company or brand, and are exchanging a few years of personal comfort for the long-term pain of those who try to follow the path they have laid down. That is why it is so important to have the mindset, understanding, and tools that allow us and our success to be truly powered by change, because that's the only future that exists. This is not just another business book warning about the inevitability of change. It is a definitive survival handbook. In reading it, you have a choice. You can throw it to one side and think you already know the answers and that you're doing everything you need to survive. Or you can keep listening and learn how to grow your business hugely. You can understand what it would take to retain your best members of staff and find ways you can continually release products and services that change the market. You can decide that you want to be able to sleep at night knowing that you are doing something that actually, really, truly matters. Then you can build on the lessons shared and heed the warnings of those who failed last time around. You can develop into a leader who can future-proof your business, not because you reject and repel change, but because you accept its inevitability and embrace the new and exciting journeys that it can take you on. Are you going to build a wall or find out how to build a windmill? The choice is yours. Chapter 2. Powered by Change, a Personal Story. I am Jonathan Macdonald, and the story of my childhood is best described by 2 pictures. The first one was taken 8 weeks before I started school. I was 4 years old, an innocent boy with bright, inquisitive eyes, as yet untethered and undamaged by life. Life was just about playing. The second picture is taken exactly 1 year later. I had 11 stitches on my right cheek, a stab wound in my left hand, and the lead from an assault with a pencil still embedded in my right hand. My eyes in the second picture tell the story. The innocence was gone. Life sucked. I was supposed to be out playing with my friends, but I was already experiencing some of life's limitations. On my first day at school, I was noticed at once for my frizzy hair, taken aside by 2 school kids in my lunch break and stabbed in the hand with a pencil. The lead remains in my hand to this day. I had been given up at birth by my natural parents, put into foster care, and then adopted some time later. My adoptive parents noticed a change in me from this very first day at school. Sadly, this assault was only the beginning of 11 years of mental and physical abuse. In this period, I had numerous bones in my body broken. My nose was fractured so many times that there is no cartilage remaining in it now. And I have a big bump at the back of my skull where my head was rammed into a red plastic fire bell when I was aged 7. Upon reflection, it's hard to tell whether I asked for help enough to warrant it, but nonetheless, nobody intervened or stopped this abuse. At the age of 5, I was in charge of me and had to decide how I wanted to be treated, whether I wanted to survive, and what to do in order to ensure that happened. My answer to this quandary on that first day at school was to hide under a chair in the reception area. Teachers coaxed me out and asked my parents to collect me. My first question to them was whether every day at school was going to be like this. I was instructed that I had to go to school, and in my eyes, this gave me little choice. I had to somehow deal with it. Over the next 11 years, the shapes and forms that this abuse took progressed and mutated, but this was also a time of enormous learning for me. Not in the educational disciplines I was at school to master, but in the art of survival. I did not realize that the lessons I learned here were going to power my future, but that's exactly what happened. The changes that I went through in my school days powered what happened to me in the rest of my life. I did some early analysis at the age of 6. There were 3 children of colour in my school in leafy Surrey, in the heart of the south of England. Julian and David were my friends, but Julian was the fastest runner in the school. He was also a target for bullies, but nobody could catch him quick enough to bully him. And David was a talented football player, which got him off the hook too. I had no running ability and no football prowess. I was firmly in the sights of the bullies, and I couldn't get away. It was at this point that I realized that life is unfairly weighted, and that nobody else apart from me was going to address that unfairness. But what was I to do? Targeted, highly vulnerable, and pretty defenseless. I never accepted that being a victim was the best outcome. I deemed it less optimal than simply surviving. I also realized, during this time, that I had one redeeming quality. I could articulate my speech and express myself in meaningful ways. I tested this ability when I had the chance to speak directly to my tormentors. I worked hard on this ability, and by the time I was 8, I was able to converse with them for 3.5 minutes before they started attacking me. What I said clearly resonated somewhat with them, because they would apologize for what they were about to do, but it didn't stop them beating the hell out of me. This was progress of a sort, but I needed other diversion tactics. When I was 8, I ran into a school hallway and ended up by accident in the middle of an audition for parts in Nero, a play about the Roman emperor of that name. I saw my opportunity to hide. I had never read the script and did not know the plot, but realized that while I was on stage, nobody could physically get to me or hurt me. Stumped for something to say, I admitted that I knew little about Nero, but that my world was on fire too, and I needed protection to survive. I got the key part, and from that moment onward, I auditioned for every play that my school produced, because nobody could bully me on stage. The stage became my safe place. I knew now that everybody was not on my side, but I had an escape from the torment. I was able to be on stage while simultaneously changing the way that people thought about me, and it was the happiest I had ever been in my life. It didn't stop the bullying, of course. Nothing I did seemed to be able to stop it, and I seeped into a mindset that this was what my life was always going to be like, and I couldn't do much about it. It is a human reality that we cannot help but predict our future based on our past. It doesn't matter how illogical that is. When things go wrong enough, people feel that they are pre-constructed victims and that their place in life is to suffer. It is extraordinarily hard to break out of that mindset, and that's where I was for 11 years. The happiness that I thought I found soon dissipated. I was on a downward spiral, and things just seemed to get worse and worse before they got better. The last day that I was bullied in school was when I was 16 years old. I was stabbed in the stomach with a barbecue fork. The boy who did this had been a key tormentor for the past 4 years of my secondary school education, and I had been warned that day, before the attack, that I would be travelling home in an ambulance. That would have certainly been unusual. Most of my beatings had stopped just short of necessitating that emergency call. I was used to the thud of baseball bats on my kneecaps and air being sucked from my lungs when I was kicked in the stomach. But on that day, this particularly vicious bully had a plan for something much worse. In that moment, while I was lying on the floor, skewered by a barbecue fork, I suddenly saw the decision between being a victim and being a survivor with a clarity I had not experienced before. I decided at that moment that not only was I not going to let this attack beat me, I was also never again going to be physically abused. To construct a thought that something is not going to be allowed to happen again means that one has to take the learnings from the past and turn them on their head. Lying on the floor, I came to the instant realization that my survival was down to myself. I was being bullied because I was allowing myself to be a victim. I had the ability to take control and prevent this from happening again. Until then, I had always rationalized the bullying as something that happened to me, rather than anything I could do something about. Lying on the ground, I realized that I had to use the constant, unexpected change that always seemed to come my way as something that could help me grow and develop, rather than something that I just repelled and hoped against hope would eventually go away. I believe that what happened in my brain that day was an empowering mechanism that used a particularly unpleasant circumstance to take back control. My previous failings would no longer be seen as negative outcomes, but lessons that I could learn from. The reason that I went on to live free of bullying is because I learned how I was allowing it to happen and made the choices to ensure that it never happened again. I realized that I was inadvertently giving permission for the bullying to happen. This was not about forgiving my bullies. It was about accepting accountability for events that were going wrong and devising strategies to correct and change those situations. What did I do differently? I recognized that I was allowing myself to be bullied by continuing the behavior that my bullies had learned to anticipate. I always walked home from school the same way, and 50% of the attacks happened on my journey home, so I changed my route. I had often wondered why my friends had never stood up for me or prevented the attacks. Later, it turned out that they had actually been complicit with the bullies, allowing me to be victimized so that my tormentors left them alone. I changed my friends. And the third, proactive, action that I took was to learn judo and kickboxing so that I could protect myself by knowing how to use my bullies' force and strength against them. I figured that I only needed to stand up to a bully once and win, and the bullying would stop. I changed my attitude. I discovered that it is relatively easy to change your mindset once you are willing to believe that your outcomes can change. I also found that it is relatively quick to see the benefits of doing so. It is the willingness that is key. I decided on the ground after being stabbed that this situation needed to change, and that I needed to be the agent of that change, realizing which parts of the picture I could adjust by altering my own behaviors and personal outlook. This was a pivotal point in my development, and I would love to be able to say that everything has been linear, straightforward, and on an upward trajectory since then. However, that is rarely how life works, and a decade or so later, I found myself driving down the motorway knowing that my business, life, and financial prospects were apparently in ruin. I was in a state of total despair, contemplating what would happen if I simply jerked the wheel and decided to end it all. How did this happen? In a different way from the bullying of my school days, I had allowed myself to feel that I was a victim with few choices. After working in my family's gift shop and eschewing my previous ambition to become a barrister, I opened a music retail outlet and moved into the nascent online music scene by setting up mmusic.com in the late 1990s when there was only one other music retail website in the UK. The company amassed a dominant share of this new market for a very short period of time, making me very wealthy in my 20s. And I had also begun to believe that everything in my business career would always go exactly to plan. 3 years later, I was the youngest ever chairman of the British Music Industries Association and was persuaded to put £1 million into a TV channel called the Musicians Channel, which would teach people how to play and sing music on television. I became chief executive, mortgaged my business and property, and put everything into this new company. For a moment in time, we attracted 1 million viewers per show in a period where MTV was only being watched by around 100,000 people in the UK. Working with the BMI and politicians, we also succeeded in getting British law changed to enable all state secondary school children to study music without sacrificing another subject. However, things did not turn out as I had envisaged, as a clause in our legal agreement entitled my business partner in the Musicians Channel to dilute my equity ownership of my stake in the firm, allowing me to be bought out extremely cheaply. I ended up losing everything I had put into the business except for £12.67. Married with 2 children, aged 3 and 1, I even ended up living for a while behind a pub in a Nissan Micra, which was the only major possession that I didn't have to give back to the bank. That was when I thought about swerving the steering wheel and crashing out of my life. But then I started to think more positively and convinced myself that things could not possibly get worse. I had read the work of psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl, which explains the gap between stimulus and response, arguing that in that gap lies our growth and our freedom. He was identifying the difference between a reaction that we often have, the reenactment of something, and the moment in time when we can choose how to respond and truly own the sovereignty of our intellect. I saw again, just as I had seen at school, that the choice I had was between being a victim or being a survivor. I again chose very clearly and consciously to be a survivor, although I have to say that this time it was a really close call. What made the difference at this point was surprisingly not my children or my upbringing, but a study I had read about patients' deathbed regrets. The regret ranked 5th on that list resonated incredibly strongly with me. That oh-so-common regret is this: I wish that I had let myself be happier. I had to be a survivor, I decided, because in spite of all my wealth and achievements, I had never been truly happy. However, when I returned to my about-to-be repossessed home, I realized there had been occasions in my life when I had indeed been very happy. When I condensed those moments to their essence, I could see that these were the moments I had spent on the stage, interacted with inspirational people, and was able to make people see things in a different way and expand their thinking. I had sudden clarity that the combination of those 3 specific elements made me content. None of those features were particularly going to make me as much money as I had already made and lost, but I saw then that I am essentially driven not by material riches, but by working and living in a way that enables me to do those 3 things. Despite that new nugget of truth tucked away at the back of my mind, it wasn't a simple or straightforward future to build. I went on to found a number of unsuccessful companies and work unhappily for several others, but each time learning more and applying myself to make the necessary changes. It took a while, but I eventually decided to only work with people who are willing to expand their thinking, which is how I came to create the Thought Expansion Network, 10, and develop my professional speaking career. Suffice it to say that I gained a lot from these experiences. During this time, I also cemented my conviction that most businesses have little chance of survival, regardless of their size, if they do not take action to equip themselves to confront a business world of perpetual change. My purpose in much of my childhood was simply to survive, and that is what I just about managed to do. But merely surviving change and circumstance does not by itself equip us to succeed. I learned that what I was all about was finding solutions, making myself secure, and having a stage on which to operate. I was able to elevate my personal purpose to the extent that I now see the reason for my existence as enabling people to change the way that they think, in order to increase their chances of achieving maximum happiness and success. But I only realized that this is what I am at my core, after I discarded all the rubbish that I had tricked myself into believing that I was before that. I realized eventually that what drives me the most is changing the way that people think. But I needed to rid myself of a lot of biases and past beliefs in order to get there. I now realize that the world needs to think differently about change, a fact that motivates me hugely to speak on stages around the globe to as many people as I can. Practice what you preach. At the time of writing, I am also in my 8th startup. It is clear to me now that success is a combination of great ideas, brilliant execution, fantastic timing, and recognition of the consequences of actions. It is also about not listening to too many people's ideas, as demonstrated by the well-known image in the reference material that shows what the iPhone 7 would have looked like if the company had built it in exactly the way that all the users and experts were telling them to do. It is safe to say that it certainly does not look like a world-class desirable piece of technology. For sure, one also needs a little luck in business, but the main conviction I've been left with is that success is extremely unlikely to ever be an accident. Just as I took control of my various situations and learned not to have a victimized mindset, organizations need to know how to adapt themselves to what our perpetually changing world will throw at them. I now have a black belt in kickboxing.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?